Welcome, dear viewers of Science Scribbles. The functioning of an ecosystem should be understood more by studying the terms trophic levels, food chains, and food webs. In all ecosystems, food is the basic source of energy for all living components. Whereas green plants alone are able to trap solar energy for the manufacture of food. All other organisms are consumers, depend directly or indirectly on plants for their food. Trophic literally means feeding, and trophic levels are the various steps through which food and energy pass in an ecosystem. Organisms obtaining food by the same number of steps belong to the same trophic level. And in all ecosystems, producers forms the first trophic level, herbivores the second trophic level, secondary consumer forms the third, and so on. And the last trophic level is normally occupied by the decomposers. Then, what is a food chain? A food chain is the series of organisms through which food and energy is transferred in the ecosystem. That is, it is a sequence of organisms of repeated eating and being eaten up. A food chain always shows a linear sequence of who eats whom, and it always begins at the producer level and ends with the detritivorous animals in the dead and decayed organic matter. Food chains may be simple or complex. A simple food chain has only two links in it. It always operating in decomposing plant matter where detritivores acquire their food from the decaying vegetation. Most of the food chains are complex with many links in it, starting from the live producers, progressing through various levels of consumers, and finally ends with the detritus feeders. Food chains are classified into two categories, that is the grazing type and detritus types. A grazing food chain always begins with the producer and proceeds through the grazing herbivores and then through smaller to larger carnivores till ends with the decomposer. A grazing food chain is always a complex one and is the major food chain in all ecosystems, and it always depends directly on the input of solar energy. A detritus food chain starts with the detritus feeder of decomposing organic materials and proceeds through small predators of detritivores and through the larger predators and finally ends again with the detritivores of decomposing organic matter. So detritus food chain depend mainly on the organic matter produced in the ecosystem and not directly so much on the input of solar radiation. A food web is a more realistic representation of feeding relationship in an ecosystem. In most ecosystems, many different food chains are possible. But these food chains are not isolated but are interconnected. A food web is a collection of these interconnected food chains in an ecosystem, and it explains all the possible trophic relationship in the ecosystem. Instead of the linear pathway of food chains, a food web explains the complex and interconnected trophic relationship between multiple organisms of the system. So, food web allows an organisms to obtain food from more than a single pathway, which is helpful for the survival of organisms and to maintain the stability of ecosystems. The greater is the number of these alternate sources, the greater will be the stability of ecosystems. Because in a linear food chain, if one species gets affected or become extinct, the species in the subsequent trophic levels also become greatly affected. Whereas if there exists a food web, if one species becomes less or affected, it does not seriously affect other trophic levels as there are different options. So, the key difference between a food chain and food web is that a food chain has only a single linear pathway of food with a unidirectional flow of energy, whereas a food web has an interconnected network of food pathways with complex and multidirectional flow of energy. Thank you for watching the video.